Gary Parker to help you with some patterns here. All right, so hopefully you've already gone through lesson 3.1 and the homework related to it, and we got used to identifying a pattern that changes but is similar each time, and then the number of items as we move across, and trying to find a formula for that, what we call the nth term. So the last assignment this week is to share your work based on this problem right here. Notice that this one says stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, so you might wonder, the previous ones had a stage 0. What would stage 0 look like? Something right before this. And you have 4 things to do based on that. I'm going to do something similar based on this pattern right here. So I start with this triangle of 3 dots, and then I have a slightly bigger but similar pattern. So what is happening from here to here? And there's many ways that somebody could look at this and say, oh yeah, this happens, then that happens. And then somebody else would go, oh yeah, I get what you mean. So I'm just going to point out one of those many ways to look at it. So I see a triangle, and then I see that triangle plus 2. And then I see the figure above plus 2, right? So 3 plus 2, then I have 5 plus 2, so I keep adding 2. Now, spreadsheets are really good at working with patterns like that. So I'm going to show you how to look at this pattern on a spreadsheet numerically. So I'm logged into my Google account. You can see my little icon there. So if you don't have a Google account, I recommend you get one because Google Drive and Google Sheets are awesome. So usually when I'm starting a new spreadsheet, I pick a folder to put it in. And so I have a lot of folders here, math classes, and quantitative literacy is down here somewhere, and math 92, which is now math 98, and then I'm going to start a new sheet, create and share. And the first thing I do when I start a spreadsheet is give it a name. If I'm not sure what to name it yet, I'll work on it and then decide on a name later. But it's not good to have a bunch of things called untitled spreadsheets. So this was sharing your work, and this is week 1. And then down here, I want to keep track of which figure I'm on, and then how many objects, and in this case they are squares. And I have what I labeled as figure 0, and it had 3 squares. And then I have figure 1, and it had 5 squares. So many ways to continue this. So if a pattern is linear, meaning it changes by the same amount each time, and this one is what I call linear because it increases by 2 and then increases by 2 again for my perception of it. The spreadsheet's good at recognizing linear patterns. So if I say 0, 1, linear pattern would say 2 should come next. And if I highlight, right, so I highlight these guys, let go of the mouse, point to the bottom right corner, click and drag down. That bottom right corner is the magic fill button, and the computer guesses I want it to go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I can do something similar here. I can highlight those 2 and I can say, hey, continue the pattern. So then I let go, point to the bottom right corner, and then drag down and hope it sees the right pattern. And it says, oh yeah, add 2 to get 7, add 2 to get 9, add 2 to get 11. So that's one way to continue this pattern. Did I have to label that this was figures 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? The answer is no, but if I need to identify that 15 relates to the 6th figure, it's a good idea because sometimes the row number isn't necessarily the thing I'm referring to. So sometimes row numbers are nice, but other times it depends on what else is going on the screen, where this grid of information was located. So just some quick notes about spreadsheet etiquette. Give it a title that you'll understand later. When you're putting any number down on the screen, you should have a label for it somewhere that says, hey, what is this thing? So here I'm trying to make it obvious that when I look at this or somebody else does, that all these numbers relate to squares and these numbers here are related to the idea of figure. Okay? All right, so let's look at this a slightly different way. So I am going to just make a new column for more squares. Now, I definitely need to know I started at 3. And then what I want to tell the computer to do is add 2 to that in the next cell. So one way to do that would be to start with an equal sign because I want to do a calculation, and then click on the number above, 3, and add 2 to it. Now, the nice thing about the way I did that, if I double click, it says, hey, you clicked on the cell above. That cell is called C2. If I change what was in C2, like maybe instead of starting off at 3, I'll start off at 2, then it'll adjust anything based on it below. And if I continue that idea, so equals, take the cell above and add 2 to it. And again, why am I doing that? Because when I looked at this pattern, I said, oh, look, add 2 squares, and then add 2 more squares. So I'm thinking about adding 2 repeatedly. If I go back and change this to a 3, it'll say, oh, add 2 to get 5, and then add 2 to get 7. So that's a slightly different way of continuing the pattern. Now here's a super important thing about filling patterns in a spreadsheet. If you want the computer to recognize a linear pattern, then you highlight 2 or 3 terms, and then you fill down. If you want to continue a formula, so for example, I have a formula in this cell, then you highlight a single cell. Okay? So I'm just going to highlight that single cell that has the formula in it. Up here it says, hey, your formula is equals C3 plus 2. I only fill down that single cell. And this takes some getting used to. Okay? Now the cool thing is about that is when I look here, it says, hey, take C3 and add 2 to it. When it got copied down, the computer knew to change the C3 to a C4. And this is what's called relative cell referencing. So what the computer's really thinking is take whatever's in the cell above and add 2 to it. So when it copies that formula down, it says, oh yeah, the cell above is now C5, the cell above is now C6, the cell above is now C7. So relative to where I am now, where should I look? That's called relative cell referencing, and that's what I'm doing here. Okay. So I'm going to show you one more way to do this. Now, you might look at this pattern and get the idea that, well, if I add 2 over and over again, repeated addition is multiplication. So the answers to this problem must be related to multiplication somehow. So it turns out they are. So the pattern here is starting with 3, add 2 repeatedly. So starting with 3, and we want to add 2 over and over again. So what that looks like in terms of another formula, so yet one more way to look at this, and this is a linear pattern, is equals, start with 3, then add 2 times, and in this case, the figure number is what I want to work with. So at first, I don't want to add any 2's, but then I want to add 1 2, and then I want to add 2 2's, and then I want to add 3 2's. Okay, so what I'm going to do is say here equals 3 plus 2 times the figure number. Does this always work? Sort of. So now that's a formula, right? So to fill a formula down, I highlight the single instance of the formula, click the magic fill button, and drag it down. And what should happen is if I identified the pattern right, the computer should give me the same set of numbers. So I have 3 different ways to make that happen. First way is the computer gets a starting linear pattern and then continues it. Second way is I have an initial number, and then I say, hey, grab the cell above, add 2. That's called a recursive pattern. And then the last way is called a closed form solution. And in this case, I have to have some variable involved. In this case, the variable is the figure number. Okay. All right, I hope this was helpful. Do good math. I'll see you in the near future.